the guiding questions I'd like to have for our talk today are, what do we mean by ethical? If we're going to build an ethical company, right? Ethics means the moral principles that guide our decision making, but which moral principles should we choose? And why should businesses be ethical? I mean, they're in business to be profitable, right? Why should we introduce this idea of ethics into the business sphere? I'm going to cover 3 different frameworks that have different ways to answer these 2 guiding questions. And then I want to talk a little bit about SNAP. So the first framework is by this guy, Milton Friedman. And he introduced this idea of profit maximization, where he basically said, look, the business of business is to make money for its shareholders. And it needs to focus 100% on that. And ethics is really a constraint on its ability to make profit. And so businesses should really have a minimum view of ethics, right? They should just obey the law. They should comply with the rules and policies, but no more. And if you want to be ethical, above and beyond the law, go start a charity, was essentially Milton's view of the world. Very popular view, and has continued to dominate corporate law, right? Corporate law interprets the fiduciary duty of directors and officers of the company to be primarily to the shareholders, and often their interpretation of what that means sets aside any notion that there's a higher order ethics that those officers or directors have to obey. And it dominates the culture of many companies, including Silicon Valley. If you look at, Uber, kind of always be hustling, stepping on toes. Facebook, move fast and break things. There's echoes of Friedman's thinking in those, values and guidelines. So if you're like me, you might think that there are some problems with Friedman's view of the world. When you set the ethical bar extremely low and it's just basic compliance with the law, you end up with a lot of ethical gray area that is not yet addressed by the law, not yet addressed by any regulation, or maybe could be interpreted different ways. And, if the businesses if people in business are saying, my job here is just to do the least amount possible, right? And otherwise just aggressively pursue profits, well, you end up with a lot of unaddressed negative social impact, on our planet, on our, racial inequality. Who's responsible for that? The law, the regulators and the law may not be moving fast enough to address all of those issues. The second issue with Friedman's point of view is it's kind of a drag to work for a company where, the entire culture is geared towards aggressive competition and has no consideration for any social responsibilities above and beyond that. And we've really seen this, I will say, come to a head with your generation. I've been so impressed with this increasing sense that employees care where they work. A paycheck is not enough, and they really want to know, hey, if I give you my time, am I going to feel good about what I'm doing at the end of the day? And, employees are asking tougher and tougher questions. I've even learned about something recently, which is employee ethical unions. And they're geared not even towards worker rights, because worker rights are pretty good in many tech companies. They're geared towards ensuring that companies are taking their ethical obligations to all their constituencies seriously. So employees have really felt they don't want to be part of Friedman's vision of business. Second framework, you may be on board with all this, and you may say, okay, look, Nicole, I really agree with you. I want business to be a positive force in the world. And if I were to start my own company, in fact, or go work for a company, I would want it to have an amazing mission statement and positive values. And really, just be a virtuous, good company that, could have values of integrity and compassion and caring and helpfulness and honesty and honor. And this is my vision, right, of what companies should be. They should uphold a really high ethical standard. This all sounds wonderful. And what we've learned is that it's not entirely realistic. There is a new academic field called applied ethics with some amazing people, Max Bazerman, Dan Ariely, Tom and John, who we mentioned, are certainly, and all the academics that I've been connecting with are certainly well steeped in this. And this field of applied ethics says, we've noticed something. And what we've noticed is that the way that people say that they're going to act, the ethical standards that they say that they uphold, are not always what they do in real life. There's a gap. And we want to study and understand that gap. And what they've recognized is that most people want to think of themselves as good people. And this is, Tom mentioned they have a background in litigation and in white-collar law. And I will tell you, everyone in that field, you don't have clients coming in through the door and say, I did a really bad thing because I'm a bad person. Says no one. Everyone says, I'm a really good person. You have to understand. But excuse, justification, reason why, that they fail to uphold those principles in real life. And what the field of applied ethics says is we are prone, if we still think that there is something to be gained from taking advantage of others, we're going to do so sooner or later. Because all of us want, we still operate through self-interest. And self-interest will have us engage in behaviors that, if we think there's something to do to be gained by taking advantage of others, we will do so. And what will happen is we will rationalize and justify that self-interested behavior to ourselves so that we can still maintain this vision of ourselves as good people. Even worse, here's the kicker. The stronger your vision of yourself is as a good person, the more firm and absolutely certain you are in your own goodness and in your own moral virtue, the more leeway you give yourself to engage in unethical acts, because you are so convinced that you're a good person, you couldn't possibly be a bad person, and you simply do cognitive gymnastics to rationalize and justify these bad acts to yourself. I will give you a case example of this, which is Enron. Enron, we now know as one of the greatest corporate scandals and failures of all time, but they didn't think of themselves that way. In fact, they had a wonderful mission statement. They were going to create solutions for growing economies, a better environment worldwide. They had wonderful core values of respect, integrity, communication, excellence. They had a very long code of conduct. At the front of their code of conduct, they stated that they were going to adhere to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Amazing. And their CEO, Jeff Skilling, later even said, we believed that we were doing the work of God. Okay, so hopefully at this point, all of you are going, uh-oh. Right, because this, if you still have a belief that you can benefit yourself by taking advantage of others, by extreme, aggressive, self-interested competition, which is sort of the view that Milton Friedman held up in the world, you're just going to, this creates the perfect storm. And that's what happened at Enron. Their culture was one where they were very focused on short-term quarterly profits. At the end of every quarter, you either got a Ferrari or, for the top performers, or for the lowest performers, you got fired. So everyone's self-interest was geared toward what can I do to get ahead? That's the way that the culture was set up. And they did, in fact, end up engaging in, while not illegal, a questionable accounting vehicle that, when applied in the way that they did, resulted in massive fraud and ended up bankrupting the company. So again, that sort of ethical gray area, if you set the bar very low, can create real issues. And so I'm going to propose a third framework for answering these guiding questions that we set out at the beginning. Enlightened self-interest. Enlightened self-interest aligns profit and ethics. And this framework says, I understand that the best way for me to have a healthy long-term business is actually not to act out of, um, short-term self-interest. It's actually to invest in the long-term health of everyone that my business touches, all of my stakeholders. And that's actually in the best, if I do that, that's the way I will make sure that my own self-interest is accounted for. And so this is a wonderful framework because it does two things. Number one, it aligns your self-interest with ethical action and ethical behavior, with making sure that you are taking care and considering those with whom you come into contact through the vehicle of your business. So you avoid that sort of perfect storm, the applied ethical issue that we talked about. The second wonderful thing about this framework is that it takes the focus off you, what a wonderful person you are, and it actually directs your focus towards what's my actual impact on others. How is this working on others? And that's really again the way that you can escape that ethical blind spot of really just being so in love with your own image of a virtuous person, getting really honest about the tough questions that you're going to have to face as you try and have positive impact on your people through business. Not always easy road to really take a look at that, but honest.